For both boys and girls, hair grows under the arms, in the pubic region, and elsewhere on the body. The breasts of the girl begin to develop. The vocal cords of both boys and girls get larger and their voices deepen. These physical changes make the boy feel more manly and the girl more womanly. Both feel independent. They begin to be interested in members of the other sex, in social activities, and in being together. These are normal feelings. When a boy is between the ages of 13 and 16, the testes begin to produce sperm cells. These sperm cells are carried through the tubes in a thick, colorless liquid called semen.
So, you're a new teacher about to take on sexuality education for the very first time. You might be wondering, how can a teacher ensure they are appropriate in teaching students from different backgrounds? Well, here are a few things that you might need to consider in the classroom.
Age. When teaching students, you need to ensure that the content is appropriate to their age group. For example, you wouldn't teach prep students the same things as you would teach grade 5-6 students. Sexuality education doesn't mean you have to teach everything at once.
Gender. It is important that when you are teaching sexuality education that you cover some content with both genders together, but it is also important to teach some content separately. By separating genders, this also overcomes some cultural barriers.
Religion. As a teacher, it is important to take into consideration your students' religions and how this may impact you when teaching sexuality education. A good way to ensure that you are being sensitive to your students is by getting to know them and their families.
Cultural beliefs. As with religion, it is important that you take into account your students' cultural beliefs. Different cultures have different ideas about what you should or shouldn't teach your children. Again, this can be dealt with by getting to know
The students and their families and understanding fully their cultural background.
Family composition. As a teacher, it is imperative that you take into account the different family situations each student might be in. Not every family these days consists of a married mother and father.
Now that's all well and good, but how do you actually do that in the classroom?
The first step to knowing what to teach is looking through the Australian curriculum. The curriculum states that across the primary years, students have to recognise how bodies grow and change over time,
Identify and label private parts of the body and understand the contexts when body parts should be kept private,
describe what they like about themselves, how they are similar to others and how they are unique,
identify the likely physical, emotional and social changes that occur during puberty,
and plan and practice strategies to promote health, safety and well-being.
Now that you've seen and understood what the national curriculum is asking you to teach, it's time to refer back to those different backgrounds we mentioned earlier. Here are a few ways to link the two and provide meaningful sexuality education to your students.
Dialogue with parents. Before teaching sexuality education in your classroom, it is important to communicate with parents. You need to have a clear outline on what you will be teaching the students. There was time where sexuality education meant that students and their parents would attend an education night to watch a black and white video about sexual education, and that was it. We have come a long way from this. However, this doesn't mean parents do not have to be involved at all. Research has shown that parents are happy for their children to learn about sexuality education at school. However, they are concerned about the appropriateness of content and how it will be taught. By communicating with parents, they know what you will be teaching and how you'll be teaching sexuality education. Making goals and content clear. This point is for both parents and students. It is important that you are open when planning for sexuality education classes. Some examples are to explain to students what they should be expecting in these classes so there are no surprises and have time to feel comfortable about the topic. Sending a note home to parents with a clear outline of what will be taught, or even sending them part of your lesson plan, is another example. It could also even mean having a small information night where parents will be able to ask questions, make suggestions and be involved in the process.
Research and understand the students in your class. When teaching sexuality education, you need to be aware of each of your students' needs. It is important that you get to know your students and their backgrounds. As today's classroom is very diverse, it is your job as a teacher to research and discuss with your students their needs with them and their families. By understanding your students, you ensure that the content you are teaching will cater for their needs. It is important to remember that sexuality health education must be sensitive to individual beliefs, family values, community, cultural, and religious backgrounds.
Health and wellbeing perspective. In your classroom, try and approach sexuality education from a health and wellbeing perspective rather than it being all about sex. This can be a concern, especially for some students from different cultural backgrounds. The Australian curriculum explains that sexuality education is about teaching students to take care of themselves and understand what is happening to them. In fact, its aim is actually to counteract the highly sexualised materials that students come across these days, especially in the media. Approaching this subject from this way makes it more obvious that it's necessary and all students should be involved regardless of their background.
Separating genders. By offering students a girls only and boys only session, it allows them to feel more comfortable. These classes allow students to ask questions that they may feel embarrassed or ashamed to ask otherwise. They also give the students an opportunity to bring up any topics that they would like to discuss in an environment that they feel safe in.
Use examples of diversity. As with any subject, it is important to make learning seem relevant to all students in your class. If you have a diverse class, then you need to teach sexuality education using diverse examples. For this, it is particularly important that you've made that effort to get to know the students in your class. You can do this by consciously including examples of different backgrounds and situations. For instance, an activity about families should include images of your typical nuclear family, a single parent family, a family with divorced parents, and a family with same-sex parents. Teachers need to make a real effort to ensure they are not making one particular demographic feel bad or abnormal.
Consider what you say. The biggest influence in the sexuality education classroom is you, what you say, and how you act. Only teach on what the curriculum says to teach and answer questions that students have asked. This is important as you do not want to talk about a certain topic, and misinformation can just be as detrimental as no information. It is important to know that it is okay that you do not have an answer to their questions. It is better to come back to that question and answer correctly and appropriately than to give the wrong information. Through your language, you need to ensure you are being sensitive to the diversity in the classroom and setting a good example. For instance, you need to be aware that some children can know from an early age that they are attracted to the same sex. It is your responsibility to create a safe environment in which there are no negative connotations for things to do with sexuality education.
So those were just a few recommendations that we have about teaching sexuality education in the classroom. Here are some of the references that we use to get our information and that might be useful to you as well as a teacher. Most importantly, don't be scared of teaching sexuality in your class. Relax, and it's easier than you think.